Today's episode is brought to you by the Hippocratic Collective. Check out our shows and join the conversation at thehippocratic-collective.com. Hello, I'm Joan. I'm a Canadian family physician who also works as a restorative medical educator, facilitator, and coach. I create spaces that rehumanize the work of healthcare. I'm creating this podcast to remind myself, as well as anyone else working in a helping profession, that when you are working and caring for your human patients, you are the other human in the room. Hello there, healthcare humans. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of The Other Human in the Room. So today we're back with another solo episode, and I'm still in the midst of my 3-month hiatus from sort of regularly releasing new episodes on the podcast feed. I'm recording this at the end of January 2026, and if you've been following along, I've put a pause on active weekly production for 3 whole months. So the next time I'm releasing new episodes isn't until March. You're going to hear this in March. And in the meantime, I'm releasing these like from the vault, rerun episodes, if you will, of some of my favorite episodes I've released over time in the past. And the topic of today's podcast is coming out of what I'm reflecting on in that time, as well as coming out of conversations I've been having inside of the Creating Space course that I am currently facilitating, that I run once a year for 6 months, ending in a fabulous retreat. And so if you're curious and slightly confused by the title of this podcast, What's in Your Garden? Allow me to explain. But I'm going to explain the long way. So I'm not about to start talking about gardening right now, okay? What I am going to tell you about is reflecting back a bit more on the benefits of this pause, the benefits of making this decision with this podcast, where I'm very slowly and with gentleness and ease starting to like open the doors to recording episodes of this podcast to be released in a couple of months. I stopped making new podcasts over 2 months ago now, I guess, and or at least a month and a half ago. And I thought right away I'd be like, okay, I'm going to read stuff. I'm going to be coming up with new ideas. But actually, I needed all of that space. You'll have already heard at least one episode that I recorded that was at the beginning of this month. And even now, it's like several weeks later before I'm recording my next one that's like a one-on-one. And the space is necessary. If you know me, you know I'm kind of obsessed with space. And I think it's because I didn't give myself access to nearly enough space for the vast majority of my early life and early career for sure. And reflecting on what this space has allowed me to do, not only has it allowed me to just like take a little space, a little time away from this podcast to, like absence makes the heart grow fonder, actually remember more fully and deeply and with like really clear intention, like what I'm doing here on this podcast. I never actually stopped enjoying creating the podcast. It's one of my favorite things I do, but it's sort of on a deeper level, like say you're in a good relationship with another person, but you spend some time apart and then you actually miss them. And when you get back together, you're like, there's things I was taking for granted. That's what I'm feeling now with the podcast and why, I didn't have it on my schedule. I must record a podcast on this day. I knew I had space and time, and I was actually curious, like, what am I going to do with it? And then this idea emerged, like I said, through my reflections and through conversations I've been having in the coaching course. And out of it sort of naturally emerged this idea. And I've been missing that. I've been more having to, when I was doing it week over week, it would happen more like I'd be kind of brainstorming and kind of pushing an idea out. And those are great episodes too. But it feels really fun to have it sort of more slowly emerge and find a way for it to take shape and have some creativity with it and play around with a few different ideas without any time pressure on it. Not that there ever was time pressure even before, like nobody's making me make this podcast. And so that's like one of the lessons I'm even learning is like, hey, even if you get back into a more like regular routine and habit, which was very helpful at first, by the way, to just like get into that routine. If I get back to it, I can still remind myself that I can always stop because all of this is optional. This is like bonus, delightful fun that I also is like my deep purpose in this world. That's sort of a cool combo. That's what this podcast is to me. So one of the things I did with all that space was allow myself to miss the podcasts. But it also, if I'm honest, a big reason that it felt time to take the pause wasn't because my relationship with this podcast was bad. It was still really quite good, though like maybe mildly obligation based, but mostly it was good. It was more that I realized there was too much else on my plate. I talked about how the early last fall, especially, I suddenly recognized I was rapidly reaching and at times on some days going over my capacity again. And I am deeply committed to the project of designing my life, total life, and especially my work life to be working under my maximum capacity. So that, yes, there can be kind of calamitous emergency surge days, but the goal is like, even on those surge days, maybe at most I like max out, but I'm not going over and actually starting to harm myself with how much I'm pushing myself. Like that's the goal for like longevity in this career, for an enjoyable work experience. I think I do my best work, both seeing my patients and doing this kind of work when I'm in that state, right? And a big relief came to me when I realized I could take a pause from this podcast, also because I honestly was having too many requests for meetings for other projects I'm a part of and didn't have space on my calendar to put them there. Because really, one of the lessons I have discovered because of a couple new projects and roles that I'm connected to that happened last year is sometimes what you initially conceptualize as how much time and energy a project will take, sometimes you're wrong. And sometimes that project will take much more time and energy than you originally budgeted for. And there can be ways in which you say, okay, but I'm only going to let it take this much time and anything else just has to wait. And I have done that actually with one of the two projects I'm talking about. But the other one, and this one I'll name directly what I'm talking about. I'm a co site director, but it's a developmental site director for a new family medicine residency teaching site affiliated through the university that I'm faculty at, McMaster, in the town that I also work in, Guelph. And so McMaster has multiple teaching sites sort of all scattered around there. McMaster, the university, is housed in Hamilton, Ontario, now famously the filming site of many heated rivalry scenes, FYI, but also Guelph, where I practice the heated rivalry asides. I'm sorry, they'll probably not be relevant by March, but like all the hockey was filmed there at Sleeman Center. I'm still obsessed with heated rivalry right now, sorry. But also that's where I practice. And though we have often been a site where we take learners, like I've been taking learners for the last couple of years, we didn't have our own home base there. And so me and another colleague, excuse me, have been creating and arranging how residents could be like fully housed in Guelph. And I had an estimate of how much time that would take. My co-site director had an estimate. Even like the program at large had like an estimate of how much time that would take. And we have discovered over the course of the fall and even into this new year that estimate was an underestimate for multiple factors that like it's not anyone's fault, but we just all actually recognize, whoa, this work takes like much more time and energy than we originally allotted for it. And that can be hard because you could feel a little panicked. Like I think part of why I felt so cramped in the fall was this work, as well as some other things. And unlike those other things, which I, put pause on, like the podcast, just right size my relationship to and wasn't as invested in, shared the load like I did some of those other things. But with this one, certainly sharing the load and making sure I'm collaborating well with my co-site director and our EA, but also like there is a certain amount of the work that is mine to do. And creating space by releasing some of those other things, including this podcast, producing it regularly every week, has given me space to literally like take all the meetings that I didn't realize I'd need to take. Especially because Wednesday, which is the day that I record this and I'm recording now, is also the day where like a lot of that academic stuff happens. And it was literally causing like schedule conflicts. So, um, the reason I'm telling this story is just like, also, FYI, this happens to everyone. If you've taken on a commitment and then realize after the fact, if I want to do this to a standard that actually feels authentic to me and my values, if I want to feel good about the work I'm doing, I'm realizing I'm going to have to allot more of my time to make it happen. And now I'm feeling a little crunchy and a little cramped. You're not alone. Been there. Even as someone who teaches this stuff, I've discovered it experientially in a new way, how that can be true. And it leads me back to gardening. Was that too harsh? Did that feel like a total like whiplash right turn? It doesn't to me. I don't know. It feels very natural to me. Because as I was thinking about how this is all unfolded and like the lessons I want to learn from it and take forward. At the same time, I've in the Creating Space course, I've been supporting these fabulous healthcare humans week on week in finding ways for them to create space in their mind, in their body, and in their life, in order to have a more spacious experience of their work in healthcare, right? And one of the analogies I shared with them that I heard was a really helpful one, and they've kind of kept in their mind's eye since I shared it, is thinking about your time, your like just the total time you're allotted on the earth, your schedule, like week over week, thinking of it as a garden, right? So, the idea that, like, if you think of a 24-hour day, even that is a certain limitation of time, right? The amount that you can spend doing any particular thing, max you would spend 24 hours on it. And I wouldn't recommend that because then you don't sleep or eat, right? So probably be less than that. And there's so many different ways you can think of time that can help you drill in some of these concepts. But I really like using the analogy of a garden because it also speaks to the fact that, like, unlike just looking at a boxy calendar, like my Google Calendar, that's where I live my life is according to that. It has all these recurring invites and it can feel very like static and samey and like not living. Meanwhile, life and my body definitely lets me know that actually, yes, those are things that are the suggestions of what I do day to day. But then life shows up and like knocks a bunch of those out of the way. So there's days where I have way more or way less energy than I thought I did. I get sick or something happens. And so the calendar is useful to give me a framework. But having this other analogy of a garden, even just to help me consider how my time is being spent over time, I found it to be a rich one. So I wanted to share it with you. And I was thinking of different ways to share this. One of the things that came to me, it was like a little bit of imposter syndrome because I am certainly only a novice gardener. Like, I feel like, should I even say novice? I'm like intern. I have planted things in the ground and observed their effects over the time. So I think that makes me a gardener of a kind. But like, that's kind of it. Like, I cannot say beyond that. Other people in my life, like my mom, you know, she knows so much about gardening and what different plants need and the seasons and stuff. I'm just more observing like secondhand. And so a bit of me was like, how can I talk about this and like have it be a rich analogy when I like literally don't know much about gardening? So what I decided to do is like look up an article about gardening and the specific concept in gardening I want to share with you because it applies to that story I just shared and to a way to think of like how to intentionally decide how much you want to commit to in your life. If you're feeling super overloaded, or maybe you're even like at the start of your career or you've started fresh and you're now like trying to decide how much to take on. Like either way, either you're already feeling overfull and you're like, how do I do this? How do I figure out what to take out? Or you're kind of at a new plane, whether you're just starting or, just moved to a new town or whatever, and you're deciding what to put in. I think the analogy of the garden is going to be really helpful. And in particular, the need for space in gardening, right? So the article I found from futuregarden.co.uk is called The Importance of Plant Spacing. So as I go through this article, I'm going to like literally read you an article about gardening. So you'll learn about gardening. Congratulations. This is like a dual level education you're getting here. So just buckle up for that. And as we go through, I want to use analogies both in the sense of what's in your time garden, aka like what have you committed to spend your time doing? And by the way, like most people, it's easier to think of it as a time garden, but it's actually an energy garden because you can't bend time. Time is like the frame around the garden. But what we're really saying is like, how many plants are you planting in your garden? How much energy are you trying to give to all of these plants, right? So thinking of your life. So like thinking of my life in my time garden, I have my family life. I have, and that's like a plant or a set of plants, you could say. I have my clinical life and like my clinical practice, and that's a plant of its own. I have this podcast. It's its own plant, right? Um, uh, you could say right now what I've done with that plant maybe is like take it out of the garden and pot it somewhere and then see what happens to it. And I'm going to replant it later when I get back into the routine. Like, so you see how this analogy can work? I'm having fun with it. Are you having fun with it? um, I also have, my work with Hippocratic Collective. I have the site director work. I have the time I'm spending being a preceptor for residents. I have the time I spend both participating in and helping to run the online choir that I'm a part of. I'm like literally listing all my plans. What else do I have? I have like time I spend with the Ontario College of Family Physicians co-facilitating a peer support group. And I have 2 of those. And I've noticed that that actually is too many plants for that. It feels fine, but because of these other plants I've got now growing in my garden, I'm recognizing I'm going to go back down to 1 plant when the new season comes up in April. Just a direct analogy of like realizing that when you have too many plants in your garden, there isn't enough space for them all to grow, sometimes at all, and certainly not to grow well. And that's why I find this analogy works, because if you just think of it as static blocks on the calendar, that's a helpful way too. So you know how like in healthcare, people triple book patients, even double book patients. You see it, you're like, there's a patient and then there's another patient directly next to it in the like 5 to 10 minute time slot. And then sometimes there's a third one. You see this on people's calendars and everyone's like, yeah, that's fine. As if that's not literally physically impossible to do. And so speaking of no time, like how is that going to work? So what happens is obviously those 3 people, unless you have 3 people seeing them, but if you are a single person, those 3 people are not going to be seen simultaneously. They're going to be seen one after the other in some form, and you're going to work way longer than it says you will on the schedule. So that's a visual representation of how things can look really cramped. And so if even just like recognizing that a time schedule, you can only do one thing at a time, and then having your blocks that way to make sure you're just dedicating one slice of time to one thing, that's where the calendar can be useful beginning. But then what I see is especially like highly energized and productive people, they'll have like, it will still be like 5-minute time slots of the time blocks of what you're doing in the day, whether it's seeing patients or like other tasks you're doing. And your calendar is still jammed from morning till night. And the thing that you notice, especially if you're starting to sort of wake up to the fact that like, I want to feel good about the work I do. I do want to do it well. You're having a sense of like, I have so much on my plate. I can't do anything well. I feel like I'm failing. I feel like I'm bad at my job. But when you look at it, it's not that you're bad at your job. It's that you just have too many jobs you're trying to do at the same time, right? Like I remember having a conversation with a friend who is like in a leadership position in healthcare. And she was saying like, I have so many meetings in my day. And like, this is my newest hack I'm trying out. I'm adding travel time between appointments. And these were like, she was going to have coffee with someone. She literally was taking time to travel between the appointments. Even if you have Zoom meetings back to back, like first of all, do they always run on time? Usually not. Do you ever want a bio break, as they say, which is a bit of a depressing term because like we're always bio, you know? But like, so adding in blocks and buffer time between meetings was like revolutionary for this person. And at the time that she was telling me, I'm like, that's revolutionary, right? So it's that sense of how, even on a calendar, if I space out and block out my activities and leave space between them, then it'll be more likely I'll have energy to do them all and not be like literally rushing and overlapping things. So that's kind of like phase one. And that all doesn't need the gardening analogy. But then phase two is like maybe you have the buffer and space in, but still now you're feeling pretty good. And then a new project approaches you, or you have an idea for a new project that you're like, how could I incorporate it into my life? And or like maybe you're making a transition, you're leaving a certain job, perhaps in part because it was too much for you. It was like the time demands exceeded what you wanted to dedicate to them. And now you're looking for different opportunities and you don't want to do the same thing again. This is where the garden analogy really comes in handy. Just recognizing certain projects, certain commitments will have more or less like growth demand in certain seasons, right? Just like in a garden, like there'll be times where you're planting little seedlings and there'll be times where you're simply just like fertilizing to allow it to grow. There'll be times where you're like harvesting. So like that takes different energy. And also each of these plants will need a certain amount of space in order to grow to their full potential. And if you plant too many of them, then they're going to start choking each other out. And that's what I'm going to read this article and we'll do a whole bunch of analogies about it, right? The other way you can think of, another kind of garden you can think of, which often is a direct reflection of what your time garden looks like, is what your inner like mind attention garden looks like. So is it that from the moment you wake up, the moment you wake up, the moment you go to sleep, your mind is jam-packed full, thinking of all the tasks you have to do, worrying, obsessing, ruminating? Are you also, to distract yourself somewhat from that, filling your mind with distractions? Like one thing I will admit to, in part because of the heated rivalry obsession, but also the state of the world, and also just that's what this technology does. I've been looking at Instagram way more over this past month than I have in a while. I've just been looking at my phone, like my screen time estimates. I think it's like 8 hours or 9 hours a day at some point because I read on my phone too, and I've been reading a lot of books. But I've just been like, okay, I am not giving my brain any space for new ideas to germinate and form, right? New ideas that I would love to use to create for this podcast or just create for my life. I have a desire and intention to more deeply be creative this year. And I'm realizing in order to do that with my schedule, I am also going to have to do that with my mind. So as we go through, I'm just going to read through this article. And when something reminds me of how this is an analogy to your calendar, your commitments, your mind, I'm going to bring it up. Okay. Because the importance of plant spacing is relevant to you in your life, even if you never plant a plant in your life. Are you ready? Are you with me? Are you clocking? Is this working? You let me know. Okay. Introduction. Gardening is a creative and rewarding activity, but it can also be a challenging one. And every time you hear gardening, just think life, adulting, because adulting is a creative and rewarding activity, but it's also a challenging one for sure. One of the most important aspects of gardening is knowing the correct plant spacing. Plant spacing is an important part of gardening and requires careful consideration. It affects the overall health and productivity of the plants, and it is important to get right. In this article, we'll discuss the importance of spacing plants correctly and provide tips on how to do it effectively. Are you excited? Are you ready? Yeah, let's just dive in because it's going to get into more detail after this like opening summary statements. The correct plant spacing is an essential aspect of gardening. It plays a crucial role in the overall plant health and productivity of plants. Proper plant spacing allows plants to receive adequate sunlight, nutrients, and air circulation. All are necessary for plant health, overall growth, and development. This article will discuss the importance of spacing plants correctly and provide tips on how to do it effectively. That was slightly redundant from the first paragraph, other than the sunlight. So we're going to talk a bit more about it. So, the first heading, the benefits of proper plant spacing. There's 3 categories here: promotes healthy growth, maximizes yield, and prevents disease and pest infestations. So, all of these are not just about gardening, guys. I'm going to probably overstate this point, but like really think about how this isn't just about gardening. First, promotes healthy growth. So, the correct plant spacing prevents overcrowding. Overcrowding can lead to competition for resources such as water, nutrients, and sunlight. So, this is the thing. When we overcrowd our garden, when we overcrowd our commitments, when we overcrowd our to-do list, when we overcrowd our schedule, those things necessarily then have to compete for our resources. So water, nutrients, sunlight, you can say that's energy, time, attention, right? Including like, have you noticed you have only so much like really amazing brilliance and that in a day? And then after that, your brain like definitely starts like dropping IQ points, if you will. Like by the end of a day, if it's expended too much mental energy, like don't ask me to do basic math, right? So like we all have this. That's the cue from your brain that you are at or over your capacity for the day, right? And so this is what happens. Like I think back to when I was really overcommitted. Like my peak was probably 2021, and I've talked about it before because like I was on 3 boards at the time. I was the MD lead of the vaccine clinic. I was also like recovering. I was 6 months postpartum, baby in daycare along with my toddler. COVID like rampant raving. Like I didn't see my daycare workers' faces as I handed my baby off like in the car seat to them, right? Like, so emotional, taxing things happening there, pumping still. Like, my garden was way overcrowded. And I kept trying to, and then people would be like, hey, do you want to work on this project to develop translations for a handout to give out at the COVID vaccine clinic? I'm like, yes, because I have to, because it's important. And there was major competition happening for my resources at that time. And often who got the least of them was my own family at the end of the day, my husband for sure, my own health and well-being, absolutely. And a lot of it actually came out of my clinic. Like that's when I started really falling behind on paperwork, behind on my inbox. And I was energized and enthusiastic, and that's why I kept planting new plants. And I was like, this is important, this is important. But like when everything's so jammed, I remember even like I really am proud of like the work I did on that vaccine clinic. And like I had so many like ambitions of like how I could pour energy into it. And I would just like have this big idea, halfway do it, and then lose steam because like then another thing would come along and everything was so important. And it was just like, it's like picturing it like, oh, a new shiny flower. I'm going to plant it in the ground. Oh, no, wait, there's another shiny flower. Rip that one out and plant this one in. Like there was a lot of that, which is, it's just like, it's not healthy growth. I'm like killing plants left and right. I'm killing ideas, killing projects, like not, saying yes to something and then ending up shirking it and having to back out and like not really liking that. I would rather not be that way. Certainly on some of the boards, like I'd show up to the meetings and then they'd all be on WebEx or whatever. And I'd be definitely like inboxing and not listening and hoping no one would call on me. And there would be times where someone would like ask my opinion. I'd have to be like, sorry, I didn't get that. Can you repeat the question? Because I was not listening because I was being in a meeting while also trying to do other work. None of that is healthy growth, right? Like none of that is leading each of those. I'm not contributing well to anything at that point because they're all competing for resources that are static. When we talk about capacity, one way to think of it is like, your bucket of resources and you only have so many. And if the amount that you regularly attempt to be committed to exceeds the resources you have on a given day, on a different week, then like some of it's going to end up starving, right? So what if we pared back and thought about spacing out our plants instead, right? So the other thing that it says is spacing plants allows them to spread their roots and access the necessary nutrients in the soil. So if you give the things that you care about enough to dedicate time and energy to, if you give them enough space around them, both for your active attention, but there's also like enough space for even in the back of your mind, things to like percolate and grow. Like I'd say this in particular, giving space around my podcast right now is allowing the podcast to spread roots. New ideas are coming to the surface. Um, New connections are being made. And it in part is because I'm not trying to like hustle through and power through, but like having that space, it's being nourished in the back of my mind and producing things that I'm really excited about and enjoying a lot more. Like some of the things that um I think I'm going to release this one before the one that's I think the one that's going to come out next week is like a totally new style of podcast I've never done before, where a good friend of mine who's also a therapist is going to like lead me through a therapy session. And I don't know if I would have had the time and space to do that if I'd been still trying to hustle like week over week to produce podcasts, right? Or I might have felt pressure to like do it on a certain timeline, and feeling pressure when you're trying to like sink into doing the work with a therapist, it's not going to produce the same results, you know? So, um, just to say, and yes, that's like a creative pursuit. But if you're like, oh, that doesn't apply to me because I don't do creative pursuits, I do clinical work. I've got good and bad news for you. Clinical work is deeply creative work. When you're in that room and that patient is presenting you their issues, like, yes, there's the algorithms and yes, there's like the lists that you could look up of what you should do next. But have you noticed that those will only get you so far? And there's tons of patients where you get to the end of that list and they're still looking at you like wanting more. They don't want anything from your list. And like, those are the moments where we need deep creativity, even if it's creativity of how to like set a boundary of like, that's all I have for you. But there's something so fun about trying to still work with that person and seeing if you can find an avenue of connection. You know, all the like motivational interviewing we do, all that like connection and trust building over time, that is creative work. And if we're trying to jam in so many patients in our day, there's no time for those roots to form. Yes, most of us don't wish to even dedicate like an hour to each person to getting know every little aspect of their story. Sure. But I have found it to be deeply rewarding, especially if I'm thinking like, which ones are the quick ones and which ones are my like bigger energy plants, you could say, of the day, of like investing more deeply in this particular human, asking them a bit about their life, connecting about something we both enjoy, or just hearing from them about something they enjoy. The minutes at the end where they like look at the pictures of my kids and they're like, how's your family? And I ask them, how's their family? All of that is relationship building. And like that's like deepening the roots and accessing the necessary nutrients in the soil for future conversations that might need to be harder. So if I've invested time in a relationship and then later I have to talk to them about reporting them to the Ministry of Transportation because now their illness is at a point that I'm worried about their driving, or setting a boundary, or breaking bad news, or them actually under the surface building those roots of trust, and then them finally disclosing something to me that they've never shared with anyone, right? We If we have enough space to do that, that's when those things can unfold. And it can feel like there's this pressure to always see the most number of people. And, you know, there's lots of pressure right now in the province I'm in to roster more people and make sure all our patients are attached. And I think globally, I am in support of the idea that all patients should have a primary care team and a primary care clinician for sure. And I personally refute and reject the idea that in order to get there, I'm going to cram my practice so full that I don't have space between patients. Like I don't have the spaciousness to maneuver to so that when people need that little bit more of my time, I don't have it for them. So again, promoting that healthy growth, like thinking of healthy growth of what? Relationships. Certainly relationship with your spouse, if you have a spouse, with your kids, if you have your sister, your brother, or your family, or your friends, like all of those relationships do need some amount of watering and sunlight and air around them, right? And that's what's going to create those deeper bonds. So the you need space to promote healthy growth. It's right there. The gardening website says so. The other last thing it says here under promoting healthy growth is that air circulation between plants lowers the risk of diseases and pests. It helps to keep foliage dry and prevents the buildup of moisture for improved plant health. So not only is it like, yes, it can reach out for soil, but when things are too crammed together, that's when like the pests and the diseases come up. And so for me, when I think of pests and diseases, I mean things like stress-related illness, Um, when you are over capacity and overcrowded, that's when you get really snappy and snippy. And like speaking of, so space equals like healthy relationship with people, lack of space equals unhealthy relationships. That's where like unnecessary concepts where you're sniping at your spouse, unnecessary conflicts where now it's causing more tension and issues between you and patients, even that can lead to very space eating up things like lawsuits or complaints or whatever, right? But even beyond that, just like fractured relationships, then they don't trust you. They keep coming back because they don't trust you, like, um, so we need the air circulating in all these relationships. And we need air circulating for yourself between tasks you're doing, between energy you're expending. Otherwise, you're not going to bring your best self to the work, and like the disease of rushedness, of impatience, of being easily irritated, more likely to be micromanaged, like all your tendencies. I'll speak for myself. All my tendencies that show up when I'm like stuck in survival brain, I know I don't do my best work from that place. So if I want healthy growth of the things I'm working on in my life, as well as for myself, and to avoid diseases, you know, why do people, turn to substance abuse when they're like high performing? It's like, right? Like that's the kind of stuff, like what we call unhealthy habits, things where you're like, when you look at it from a distance, you're like, yeah, this is causing more harm than good in my life, but I feel like I need it to sort of force false space between my overcrowdedness, right? Why do we feel compelled to do that? It's usually because we are overcrowded, and we could call those like disease or pests, right? So promotes healthy growth. Also, proper plant spacing maximizes yield. So when plants are spaced correctly, they have enough room to grow and develop without being hindered by neighboring plants. Each plant can receive sufficient sunlight, which is crucial for plants to producing energy. Proper plant spacing allows for better access to water and nutrients, resulting in healthier plants and higher yields. I do love how this article could have been way shorter, but it's allowing me to elaborate, which is good. Because when we talk about maximize yields, right? So sometimes when we talk about like take space so that you can feel better, we've been so deeply socialized to not care about ourselves that like that's not necessarily the strongest argument. And so that's why I often talk about how like working under your capacity is good for patient care. Working under capacity will actually increase your yield in the world. It won't make you lazy or selfish. Like it will mean that you can be more intentional and powerful in what you do for people. So if you wish to continue, or at least for the part of you that is like deeply invested in making sure you are doing good in the world, that you are being helpful in the world, that you're being productive in the world, and that part of you, like we need to throw that part of you a bone, you can look at that part of you and say, hey, producer, impact person, like need to be successful, need to be excellent, like all those things. Like when I actually give myself space, that is when I will maximize my yield. So say I've been asked to be a part of 3 projects, if I choose one of them and plant that one in my garden, then I will be so excellent at that one project, and I'll earn the Nobel Peace Prize, whatever, who cares? But like, you know what I mean? Like you'll be able to be so much more effective and excellent and high standards and productive, like all those words that your brain, unfortunately, is accidentally making you think that means you have to sign up for all the things. No. If you want to be excellent, if you want to be successful, if you want to be productive, you want to produce well, plant one tree so it actually bears lots of rich fruit versus trying to cram 3 trees on the plot and then they all like kill each other and you have like measly little apples instead. Don't you want big juicy apples? But for real. And so just thinking of that, like all the arguments that your brain is giving you falsely that you need to be signed up for the most and the most. Notice that all of those are actually at cross purposes in the end. And if you want to maximize your impact, if you want to do the most good in the world, however you would quantify that, you can do the most good in the world and maximize your yield of good by focusing in on usually fewer projects where you can dedicate that energy and you have space between them and do them well. I think I belabored that point enough, but just to say, it can be a completely altruistic and selfless reason that you're holding space for the projects you're a part of. Okay, so even that part of you could be satisfied. And then the last point, which I think may be redundant, but I'm going to read it again in case there's a little nugget in there, is that plant spacing prevents disease and pest infestations. Overcrowded plants are more susceptible to diseases and pests. They provide an ideal environment for the spread of pathogens and insects. Proper spacing allows for better air circulation, which keeps the foliage dry and reduces the risk of fungal diseases. Also, spacing plants the correct distance apart makes it easier to inspect and identify any signs of disease and pest infestations. This allows you to quickly intervene, avoiding the spread of an issue. So that is an extra bonus point. That's a great analogy. Um, which is to say, so when you have space for self-reflection, like I have space so I can journal, I have space to think deeply about my life. And that's like literally space in my calendar where I'm not trying to do something else. And so then I can really be checking in on myself. Like that was one of my saving graces for the fall is I was noticing feelings rising up and I was like, oh no, I don't have enough space. But even within that, I still journaled. I still reflected with myself. And so then I caught earlier than I certainly would have in the past when I just wasn't even thinking about that at all, right? I was like, oh, time to make some changes. And, whether it's like in the shower that's when I realized time to take a pause from the podcast. But like I had the space in my mental energy and in my day um, to notice that I wasn't feeling as well. Just another essential reason to like hold those blocks of space so that you can be with yourself and check in with yourself about how you are doing. Even if that means you check in, you're like, I'm doing great. Great. But if you check in and you're like, oh, I'm not doing great, what's going on? You have time to like diagnose and see like, hey, what's the issues? What should we change? What should be the next step we take, right? You need time for that. I've talked before how like money wise, and I didn't even think about your money garden. I bet there's a money analogy where it's like you only plant your money in certain pots and you see what invests. Like I'm sure an investment podcast would like go to town on that analogy. I don't know. But I genuinely have no idea. But for me, like I have my money date once a week where I look at my money and I see how it's flowing and I see if there's like corrections needed. That's where I'm able to identify like, uh-oh, maybe I won't have enough for this month, or I'm gonna have to readjust things. What is this recurrent subscription that I have, and do I still need it? Right? Like reflecting on that, holding space for it tends to like my financial garden and seeing that things are growing well and that nutrients in are more than nutrients being expended, right? Like money in, money out. So just another example of how when you have space in your life, you can tend to each of like the different plants in your garden and ensure they're growing well and really reflect on that. Um, yeah, I think that's all I want to say about disease and pest infestation. Because otherwise I talked about how it's an analogy for like unhealthy, harmful habits that can creep in that are often a way that your body's trying or mind is trying to relieve stress from having too much on your plate. And so if you have more space overall, you're not going to have as many of those quote unquote bad habits, right? Okay. And so how do we do this? Here are some tips for proper plant spacing. So let's see how that will be wise advice for how we can space out the plants we are planting in our life as well as in our garden. So first, and this is a good one, research plant spacing requirements. Different plants have varying spacing requirements. It's important to research and understand the specific needs of each plant. Consider factors such as the mature size of the plant. Also, look at its growth habits and the recommended spacing guidelines. Check the seed packets or plant labels for size guides and spread. And then allow enough space for each plant to reach its full size without being cramped or overshadowed by neighboring plants. So my one like actual gardening experience of this, a couple times actually, where the house I live in now is sort of the second house I've lived in with my husband that we like own together. The house we lived in before was like a little townhouse, and we built retaining walls and sort of, I don't know, the like stepwise gardens. Like it had 3 levels that you had to like climb up because it's like a retaining wall. I don't know the terms. I'm a novice gardener, okay? But we like made that, and that was like hard work but fun. And then we planted plants on each of the levels. And the thing we learned was, we got these bushes from this like garden center, and we thought we give them plenty of space. And I remember my mom coming over and being like, "Oh, it's this kind of plant. Oh, it's already this size. And I remember being very annoyed at the time and being like, it's fine, mom. But she was right because she knows about gardening. And by the time we like moved out, like I'm imagining by now they must have had to like prune back or like take out some of them because the full mature size of some of these bushes was like triple 10 times, I don't know if 10 times the size, but like much larger than the initial little bush. So at first you're like, oh, it's so scant and like sparsely populated. You want to fill it in. And I felt that way. Like at the beginning of my career, certainly, I was like, oh, I've got to fill in. I've got to immediately say yes to all the things without really properly considering that like what you sign up for and the time it takes to start something is not the same as the amount of time it will take in the end, how much space it will take in your garden in the end. Some things will stay similarly. Some actually could kind of shrink down over time if they kind of get running without you. But a lot of things will expand over time as like new aspects show up, as you get more interested in something, as maybe you rise up in leadership positions, then often then you end up expending your time in new ways, right? So really looking to what the mature size of the project you're on and getting a real sense of not just what they're like, oh, you'll just be a part of these meetings, but like really asking good questions, like for down the road, like how long are you imagining I'm going to be a part of this? Can you see the work expanding in any ways? Like being unafraid to ask those questions if this is like, say, a position someone's offering to you. And how else could you apply this, right? So looking at other people who are doing similar work and not just believing what they say with their mouths, especially if like when you watch that clinician, they're like, oh yeah, it's like so easy. It's just blah, blah, blah. But like also like maybe like whether you shadow them or like watch them, ask if you could see their calendar, ask them what time they get home at night. That's a good one, right? So it's like really getting a real sense of like, okay, I hear you saying it's not so much work, but actually then what I see by your actions and sort of the symptoms of you're like, "Oh, yeah, I show up at 7 in the morning and I don't leave the office till 7 at night," or something. You're like, is that how much if that's how much time it's gonna take, am I interested in planting a plant that will take up that much of my time garden?" If the answer is yes, go for it. If the answer is, "Oh, no," that might be a plant worth holding off maybe for another season, maybe on a different year. Perhaps not right now. The example I gave at the beginning about the site director role, that was definitely a plant that I thought was a certain size and it's turning into a different size. And I think it'll find its mature size, but until it finds its mature size, that's part of it. It's like I need to create space to allow to discover what its mature size is really going to be because it's really acting like a hosta now. Do any of you have hostas? That was some of the plants that we planted in that backyard, and they start so cute, little sprouty sprouts, and then they get so huge. But the cool thing about hostas is like you can totally trim them back, and like for the winter they can be trimmed back. And you're also going to split them and like give them to someone else, which is a fabulous analogy for like delegating some of the work to someone else and sharing the work, right? But you got to tend to that hosta, otherwise it's going to keep spreading. It does, you don't have to do a lot to it, but it will still creep up and take up a bunch of your life if you're not noticing it. So, this idea I think is so helpful of like understanding the things in your life and how much time that they will take actually, and sort of doing your research about that and maybe having a bit of wisdom of if someone says it'll take that much, like multiply that by 2 or something. Like assume it will take double the time they're saying it's going to take. Certainly at least at first if you're getting used to the work, but even as you're in the work and then they'll say, "Oh, you're such a helpful, productive person. Can you do this now that you're so efficient at this, can you do this triple the amount?" Yeah, right? Like if you're already seeing this many patients and you seem to be doing pretty good, you want to take on 50 billion more patients, like the work will always grow if you let it, right? And some amount of that work you'll want to allow to grow and some of it you won't. And so thinking about the mature size, I think it's a good piece of advice from the gardening community. Measure and mark spacing. Before planting, measure and mark the desired spacing between plants using stakes, strings, or other markers. This will help ensure the plants are evenly spaced and prevent overcrowding. So like literally what that means to me is like what I do with my Google Calendar. And maybe you don't use you don't like online calendars, maybe you have a planner. But for me, it is very useful to visually notice like, okay, I just want to plant one big plant per day. And then see what falls. Like when it used to be like meeting, clinic, meeting, no lunch, clinic, meeting in the evening. That's like, it was a good way of just visually seeing. I forgot to measure and mark spacing in my day. A lot of mine, like both in my clinic calendar, I can have blocks and space in there, but also in the Google Calendar, I'll have like blocks. Like with my creating space course, it's a Zoom course. It actually has space built into it. So the first 15 minutes that we're online together, we're not talking. It's like space for them to get there to join. So I have these sort of built-in buffers, and I've noticed measuring and marking them and having them being kind of like dedicated, explicitly stated space, very useful. So that's how I use that piece of advice. Thin out seedlings for better plant spacing. If you started plants from seeds, thin out the seedlings to maintain the recommended spacing. Remove weaker or excess seedlings to allow the remaining plants to thrive. So this is sort of like, especially if you're at a phase where you're like, okay, I have had space open up, or I'm intentionally opening up space and I'm not sure what to do next. And I have a few hypotheses, but I can't tell yet which one's going to be the plant I want to grow. Finding ways, whether it's like, I'll do temporary work, I'll shadow, I'll, locum, or, how can I simply treat these as seedlings and not like dive in? And then as the seed, like for me as a family physician, like certainly doing different locums at the start, those were like my seedlings. I was like trying out different practices, seeing what was allowed me to thrive, where I was thriving most, where I enjoyed that patient population, that clinical setting. And then I would kill off some of those seedlings. Like even if they asked me to stay on, I'd be like, nope, we're going to go somewhere else. Right. Like it's a very helpful analogy. And what it means is like, if it's just a seedling, it's not a full commitment, which means you have to be willing to kill it. You have to be willing to remove some of these. You have to, you know, maybe, and to be fair to the people, say it's a project and you're not sure you're going to be how long you'd want to be involved. Say like, hey, I can give you 3 months of my time, and then we can like reassess at the end how that's going. I'm actually doing that with one of the people who work with me, where we're trying out a new amount of time that they're going to work and doing a certain project. Let's say I'm keeping it vague for, privacy, I guess, reasons. But we have a specific time boundary around it. Like it's going to be for the next 6 months, and then we'll reassess. So no one feels like now they're committed forever and now I'm relying on them forever. But instead we're like doing the seedling approach. And if we like it, it can turn into like a more likely permanent plant in our garden. But if it doesn't work out, we'll pluck it out and say goodbye. But you have to be willing to do that. You have to be willing to do that, period, in life. Quit things, got to get good at quitting things, got to get good at pausing things, got to get good at saying, I'm out. That's just facts. And especially if you want space in your garden, that is absolute facts. Okay. And then the last bit is regularly monitor and adjust spacing. So as plants grow, regularly monitor their spacing and make adjustments if necessary. If plants are becoming overcrowded, considering transplanting or removing some to maintain proper spacing. That's literally what I did with this podcast. Isn't that fun? And I also did that with some of those other things, like I said on my pausing episode. So like I transplanted and, my hosta, I split my hosta of being the online physician choir's admin, and I split some of those duties into 3, and now I'm sharing them amongst other people. So we all get to tend to it sometimes. No one's tending to it all the time. Just as another like explicit example. So monitoring and adjusting the spacing and knowing that's a part of the work. So once you do the sort of, I'm working under my capacity, I found my rhythm, that's not a one-time thing. I'm doing it still all the time. And that's why, again, thinking of it as a garden analogy, you're not like set it and forget it. If you set and forget a garden, the weeds are going to take over. You're not even going to notice that everything's overgrown, right? So constantly tending to it. And that's true for life as well, and allows you to live life with intention, which feels a lot better, I'll say, for sure. So in conclusion, proper plant spacing is crucial for the health and productivity of plants. By providing your plant with enough room to grow, they'll be able to access the necessary resources to thrive. Additionally, proper spacing helps prevent disease and pest infestations. Spacing plants correctly is an important part of successful gardening. Spacing life commitments is an important part of successful adulting. It helps ensure optimal plant health, which is like project health, pest prevention, the things you don't want to take space in your life at all, and greater harvests, your greater impact on the world. This is why it's so important for you to pay attention to the spacing of your plants. The last thing I wanted to say that this isn't talked about in this article, but I looked up and is true. Healthy plants equal healthy soil. So for the majority of this analogy, I've been inviting you to think of yourself as the gardener, like the human on top, tending to all the plants and giving your resources in that way. Another way to think of it is that you are the soil, right? You have so many nutrients in you. And if someone, but you, overplants into yourself as the soil, you're going to leach out your resources, right? And that means you will be unhealthy. You will feel unwell. And also, then your plants are going to start dying too. So, like, if you want also for yourself to cultivate a rich, nourishing life that feels satisfying, that feels impactful, that feels meaningful, that also just like feels good as the soil, if you had no plants in you and were doing nothing, the soil then like turns like I think dusty and is arid the right word? Oh gosh, I don't know. But like, then it just turns into sort of packed dirt. Like we need plants. We need things that bring us meaning. We need things in our lives that we can co-create with and contribute to for sure. And finding the right amount of them and finding the right plants for the right season of your life to nourish you, it's a bidirectional, like mutually beneficial relationship between you and your plants. A lot of us, I think, feel like we have so many plants and they're leaching everything out of us and we're running out of nutrients. And if you're thinking that, that's probably true. And so the question is like, so which of these, start with the weeds, things where you're like, I don't want this in my life at all. It's not bringing me any meaning. It's actually crowding out other things that matter to me. Maybe starting with those. Maybe you transplant so you don't have to totally kill off. If they're not weeds, they're things you care about, but you're realizing they're overcrowding other parts of your life. Could you transplant them into a pot, AKA put them on the back burner until the next season, until next year? And then you can always replant them later when either something else has come to fruition and you can like harvest and move that out and move this new plant in, right? You can prune things back, leave enough space for everything to get the sunlight and nutrients it needs. What's in your garden? What do you wish had more space to grow? What are you, after hearing this, feeling ready to change the sizes and the amount of space it takes in your garden, whether it's going completely, getting divided up, getting shared with someone else for a season? Cheering for you no matter what. And if you liked this, let me know. Connect with me on Instagram, which I may or may not have deleted from my phone at the time, but I'll check in on it from time to time, or email me through my website. I'd love to hear if this analogy is helpful to you, because I definitely know it's going to be helpful to me. I need to prune my mind and attention garden by deleting the apps and giving myself space to be bored and letting more of these ideas come through. And I'm feeling quite proud on reflecting of this, of how I have already been tending to my garden, of like leaving some things to the side, and want to continue to pay attention to this moving forward. So it was helpful to me, at least. Hopefully it was helpful to you. All right. See you next week. Bye. I would love to take this work deeper with you. Visit joanchanmd.com today and discover my growing menu of options for restorative medical education to suit your learning needs. I offer one-on-one coaching, customized workshops, and self-study courses that allow you to connect not only with my work on a deeper level, but also with other healthcare humans just like you. So if you want to start humanizing your work in healthcare to a deeper level and do it in community with others, please visit joanchanmd.com and find those options and what fits you and your life today.